Okay.
walk out of me before, but not when I was being so charming.
Video streaming at housefarms.com.
I don't care for you or for the putrid sludge you're troweling out.
Damn fuss-faced little pimp stick.
True progressive talk.
Might be a good time for you guys to give up.
Welcome to the show, everybody. We have been blazing through. It feels like that hour went by in 10 seconds. And joining us right now from Ukraine is our dear friend Philip Ittner, who's in Kiev right now. Johnny Million is in Chicago. I'm in Las Vegas. Tonight, I will be in Huntington Beach, California, doing a Nerd Halen show at Mamba.
Tonight, I will be in Grand Rapids, Michigan, doing a convoy show.
See, we're just rocking this country to pieces. Where's your gig tonight, Philip, huh? Where's your
where's your
gig?
gig?
Good old Kiev.
Pal.
Yeah, just I want you to find a karaoke bar and sing with us in solidarity.
Please do Neil Diamond.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Nobody wants that to happen.
I don't know. I think we all do right now, actually. Turn on
karaoke
your
is an
hot
art form,
light.
man.
Let it shine wherever you go. The song he wrote for E.T. the Extraterrestrial that they went, pass. It was supposed to be the credit
which
song.
one?
Heartlight.
Oh,
No, they.
Heartlight,
I thought
that makes sense for
they
ET.
said pass.
Yes, that was.
Why did
that
I
came
know
out
that was an ET song? He just
because
said
it was a
on
radio
his
hit
own?
at the same time. He released it anyways. They were going to
Right
put
on
it.
your
It was going to
Heartlight.
be the credit song, and they were like, I don't know.
That was a big hit.
I agree. Turn on your hot light. Anyways, now that's stuck in my head. Thanks for the earworm, self. All right, Philip, bless you
That's
for
your
being here.
karaoke song tonight, Philip.
Yeah, that's it. There's a lot going on there. I'm sure you'll have some stuff on your end to talk to us about, but I do think one of the big changes this week was the U.S. officially stating that they believe the Russians committed crimes against humanity in Ukraine. That's a big step. It seems like just language, but there's legal weight behind it, and it talks. It's part of the standard in terms of how they're going to address this in The Hague in the future or what have you. When it comes to the. What's her name? I've already forgotten her name. Not Solodov, but Simonyan. To her big worries.
Margarita Simonyan.
Yeah, Margarita's always worried that she's going to end up from the Hangman's News. She brings it up repeatedly, almost as if she has what's that phrase? Awareness of guilt. So but that's it.
And this it also comes on the heels of a report by the United States that indicates that there is widespread theft of children.
Yes.
Kidnapping and taking kids to something that apparently even the Russians are like openly admitting. So even to the point of bragging about it.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I've saved this child from the evil Ukrainians. What you've really done is you've abducted children from their parents.
Yeah, it's kidnapping. It's called kidnapping. Yeah.
It's kidnapping. It's ethnic cleansing as well.
Right. Well, the idea is that
under the
Go ahead.
Yeah, under the definition of the UN ethnic cleansing, I guess it's UN ethnic cleansing charges. Part of that is the abduction of children. So this goes in line with what the vice president was saying: is that there's a growing indication that there's proof, not just accusations, but proof that Russians are committing war crimes. Right.
Obviously we know about Bucha and the mass graves everywhere. There's a report going around. It's a Ukrainian soldier who's near Bakhmut, who is essentially saying that they've got so many men, they're just throwing them after them that they don't even bother to clear their dead. And when the Ukrainians take land, it's just piles of corpses. It is positively dark ages. What's happening on the Russian side of the line, and shamelessly,
and it's
so,
even more cynical
proud.
than that.
Right.
It's even more cynical than that. I spoke to a soldier 2 nights ago, and he said that what they do is that in his experience, what they do is they will throw the waves of conscripts, the guys, the less trained or less experienced guys. To probe the lines and force the Ukrainians to slaughter these people. And then and once they've done that and they've found where the hard positions are for the Ukrainian forces. Then the army comes in
Right.
and tries to concentrate fire on those positions. So it's basically you're just throwing a bunch of people for no reason other than go find out where where the Ukrainians are.
Yeah,
Go
it's
get
like-
shot at, go get killed, so that we know where the Ukrainians are, so that we can then send in our proper soldiers and really bring force to bear. It's deeply cynical. It's disgusting. It is an indication of just how much of a lack of value the Russians put on human life, even their own soldiers.
So I just shared with you guys in the chat to see, and it's something I am not I'm reticent to post. Newsweek had this article out that the Wagner Group escalated its feud with the government of Russia by sharing a video of troops it says were killed in Ukraine due to a lack of support from the military establishment. The mercenary organization on Friday released a graphic video showing a large number of bodies laid out in a room after a Wagner Group fighter blames military functionaries led by because they're not getting ammo. That's that complaint video that's been going around. And then they arranged the dead bodies into a Z and took like a drone picture or a rooftop picture down at them and posted it. And it is, yeah. I like that's
It's awful.
Yeah, and I can't see how that doesn't come to a violent head at worst because Russia is fighting on two fronts right now. One might be smaller than the other. Obviously, the Ukrainian front is the biggest one, but they are also fighting on a front with the Wagner Group intermittently. It's one thing to have an enemy all the time. We've seen
Wagner soldiers, in quotation marks, soldiers, put out video begging the Russian Ministry of Defense for ammunition, and no follow up on that. So we don't know if we ever got them. But to have these contracted soldiers out on a frontline position, not begging their own support lines, but begging the Ministry of Defense to provide them with weaponry, just shows how much they're in disarray, how much there's conflict between the various groups, and a lack of support for the various groups, and how they're working autonomously and not together, which is, military doctrine 101. You don't do that. That's just wasting your force.
Well, there was a there was a guy. There's a guy, Igor Mangushev. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, Mangushev or whatever. He's a Russian.
Made up at all.
Yeah, he's a Russian propagandist and kind of one of these. I don't know. I guess he vlogged inside there.
Soloviev.
Yeah, right. He says that he came up with the Z symbol. He's the one who says he came up with the Z symbol as their sign for this. He was shot in the head, and like assassinated inside Russian-held territory. And people think it was a warning to Prigozhin. That's the word that I've heard. That this is like the Russians telling, because he was siding with Prigozhin more, and so they just snuffed their own dude. A guy who, by the way, did nothing but say, justified war, we have every right to be here, this is, we're going to wipe out the Ukrainians, it's, they're not a real identity, they're, NATO, Nazi, whatever, all of his stuff, this is really our land in the first place, we're, all the stuff he's supposed to say, and the I guess what people believe is that he was killed by Russians specifically under orders to scare the crap out of Prigozhin. Like that, beyond the loss of life that they're experiencing right now and the loss of gear they're experiencing right now, that is a very real thing. I don't know that I've ever heard anything like that about any other fighting force since maybe the Nazis or even pre-Nazis in World War I in Germany, where they were like, if you're insufficiently loyal, you'd get wiped out, but certainly not since.
Well, the NKVD used to do that in Stalin's Soviet army. We've heard of, I mean, it's famously when morale got very low in Vietnam, there are stories of U.S. soldiers. There was even a phrase for it: fragging your commanding officer, chucking a grenade in somebody's, somebody goes to the toilet and you chuck it in the porta potty. So there's, when morale gets low, people start to snipe at one another.
Right.
But I think aside from the Vietnam example, you're right. It's kind of the Hitler, NKVD, Stalin forces where it's like, we're so desperate for victory. If you turn around, we're going to. I mean, there's the famous, in the last week and a half, there was the awful video which purported to show Wagner guys taking a guy who tried to run away from the lines, duct taping his head to a pile of bricks and then using a sledgehammer to murder him. As an example to others, not to go off the line.
It's the second video we've seen like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
they openly talk about their the sledgehammer has now even become.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's fancy. Let's take a break real quick, and when we come back, I want to talk about, again the unity that the U.S. is showing at the Munich conference compared to the tanky conference that's happening in D.C. coming up, and then of course the Marge Taylor Greene crowd that is is desperately trying to divert this stuff, which by the way won't work. Don't stress during the break. We'll be back right after this.
You're locked into the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
So a lot has been made of the alleged disunity of NATO countries, the U.S. and our allies about Ukraine. When in reality, where it matters, the U.S. is showing and our allies are showing incredible unity. As a matter of fact, McConnell and Schumer both went to the Munich conference to show a bipartisan support. A show of support for Ukraine. And then Olaf Scholz came out, I guess, yesterday and said, get Ukraine tanks as fast as possible. Like, with all the feet dragging, there was some brand new, renewed urgency all of a sudden, and off we went. So, thoughts on that, Philip Ittner, if you could, too.
Well, it's a little weird that Schultz would do that since he dragged his feet for so long, and kind of played games with the tanks for well, that's too flippant. He made it more difficult than it needed to be to get tanks here in the first place. So for him to suddenly say, all the other guys who have these Leopard tanks, which are German built, which they have end of use contracts on when they sell it to another European power, they say, you still have to check with us before you deploy these. And so they really gummed up the works when it came to deploying the Leopards, which is really going to be essential here. So it's a little bit, it's a bit rich for him to suddenly be saying, oh, we got to hurry on this. So, but be it what it may, he's right. Let's get those tanks here ASAP. And then McConnell and Schumer being here, being in Munich with the vice president. I mean, that's great. That's exactly what we want to see from the United States. We want to see solidarity.
Right.
But all those who are kind of like knee jerk, oh, we don't want to have anything to do with this, and mostly what we hear from the Yanks is we don't want to be involved in a European war. We don't want to be sending our money. It's more than anything, we don't want to be giving our money to the Ukrainians, which is just so short-sighted. It's incredible.
Right. Yeah.
We do hear from the Europeans, especially the Irish, for some reason, in the European Union have taken this position of like extreme pacifism.
Right.
And
there's two particular
weird.
Irish. There's two Irish. I don't know. They're technically parliamentarians
MEPs.
or whatever. Yeah. That that constantly go to the floor. I don't know that it's even indicative of the rest of the parliament there, but those two are every other day standing up and going, force them to the table to negotiate, end this war now, which, by the way, is a 100% pro-Putin line. The only by the way, Russia wouldn't need to be pushed to the line to get what they want, which is claiming the land they've already taken so that they can set up another attack. That it's just obvious to anybody who watches. Obvious if you listen to what the Russians talk about. It's just forcing the Ukraine to accept losses, like allow themselves to be salami sliced on behalf of, so that the Irish can, these two particular ones can go back to pretending that the USSR still exists as a preeminent socialist force in the world and therefore it needs to be protected. That seems to be where those two are coming from.
Yeah, and the troubling thing on both sides of the Atlantic when they talk about withdrawing support for Ukraine, and I want everybody who is listening or people who watch this maybe later on a podcast or on YouTube or whatever, this is really, really important that everybody understands what I'm about to say. If we withdraw support for the Ukrainians will not stop fighting.
Right.
They won't.
Yeah, right.
This is an existential fight for them. They will not stop fighting. And equally, if we withdraw support for Ukraine, we will have to stand at the sidelines and watch as, and this is not hyperbole, a genocide happens in Europe. I want that to sink in.
Right.
Because it's not hyperbole. I know the Russians. They will come in here. There will be punitive mass murder events. They will round up anybody and everybody and run them through a kangaroo court, and then they will massacre them. We are literally, potentially, if we one day the next, which I fully do not believe will happen, but I want to just emphasize this so everybody understands it. If we don't support the Ukrainians, the Russians have no. Again, look at their lack of value on human life.
Yeah.
This will be hundreds of thousands of people, literally, potentially millions. This is a country of 40 million people. A full 10 million have fled, but there still leaves 30 million people here. We're looking at hundreds of thousands of people rounded up and summarily killed. And that's not hyperbole. I believe it 100% that the Russians have it within their capacity. Are we really going to sit by and watch that happen? So we better recognize we're either in this to the finish and a Ukrainian victory, a negotiated victory. I mean, we can talk about that. But if we just up sticks and leave, it's going to be horrific. It will make Srebrenica in the Balkans look like nothing. It'll be 1,000 times as bad. It'll be one of the worst events of mass murder in Europe since the Second World War, and I believe that firmly. We must not lose our nerve. We cannot. It's awful. Nobody likes war. Everybody wants this war to end, especially those of us who are here in the midst of this war. But you have to steel your resolve and stand up to the bully that is Russia. Otherwise, you're going to see a lot more dead. I believe that 100%.
Yes, and tying in with that, if I may, Philip. By the way, follow Philip Ittner on Twitter while it still exists, and any other social media site that he's on. We're all going to have to set up link trees like in the next day to just figure out where everybody can bounce around to. It's not a bad idea. But in the meantime, and at Johnny Million as well.
I think I might try to stream the Convoy show tonight on my Twitch channel.
What?
Even
Flora is excited. Okay, so let me put this in it, as clearly as I can for the people in the cheap seats, the Marges and the Boberts and that crowd and the Doors and all those folks. The State Duma of the Russian Federation introduced a law called, and I quote, "On the Children of the Northeastern Military District," and it is a bill set to streamline the abduction, the kidnapping, and the forced assimilation, basically creating Russian breeding farms with the children of Ukrainians, basically, that they will take these kids, adopt them into Russian families, grow them up there, and then make more Russians, essentially, ethnically, because they're so close and they don't care. They'll raise them as Russians. And this is what's right, because of the nature of the Russian language and all that. The law is called the Law on Children of the NWO. And with all these people who are like, the New World Order, they're always talking about the New World Order, the New World Order. And Putin even brings up the New World Order all the time because he believes the New World Order is him and China working together to, I guess, bounce the rest of the world and keep us from advancing and having space travel and 3D printed food. That's the one thing he wants to. But let's go back to just burning rocks to stay warm and eating bison, before it's even killed. The fact that they call it the Law on Children of the NWO is like the tone-deaf nature of the right wing and the hyper left that have bought into Putin's BS, and this includes Roger Waters and others who are like, we just got to stop this. Why? Because Russia's losing. That's why. They're blind
or
spot.
just war's bad.
Yeah, right.
War's bad, and we hate it, and that's a human emotion. I understand the empathy of that, but you got to stand up to a bully. I mean, did you even talking about the children? Did you see the video that was broadcast nationwide in Russia of a woman purporting to be a member of a humanitarian child aid group sitting across from Putin and saying, "Oh, thank you so much for starting the special military operation because I have just adopted a 15-year-old boy from Ukraine, from Mariupol, and I am now going to re-teach him how to be Russian and not believe in transgender
horrifying.
rights and all this kind of like stuff that and they broadcast that.
Right.
They openly said we are stealing children from Ukraine. I mean, this is the enemy that we're facing, and to show them any kind and to capitulate in the face of that, as horrific as war is, you can't give in to bullies, or they'll just keep doing it. Mm-hmm. So no, and Roger Waters breaks my heart because I'm a big Pink Floyd fan, but
that really bummed me out too.
The rest, the people who will, all the people who would just say stop the war no matter what, don't recognize how horrific the Russians have been behaving here and will continue to behave.
The argument is that their argument is I'm anti-rape because I want the person being sexually assaulted to stop fighting and just let it happen. Because once you stop fighting, it's no longer rape. That's the mentality of these people. I don't know how much, I know it's a disgusting analogy, but it is absolutely in line with the level of logic and thought being put into this. It is horrifyingly grotesque, naive, and self-indulgent. And the idea that the other thing too, and we'll talk about this because we're coming up on the middle break. I want to actually check in with you too, Philip, after the next break if we could, about kind of life right there now, because I know there was a cruise missile warning there last night, yesterday, this morning, depending on the timing. Sorry about the time difference in it. And we'll talk a little bit about that after this break. We're going to take a break. We'll be back right after this. It's the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Don't forget, follow Philip, and you can watch his vlogs as well.
Welcome back to the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide.
Welcome back. So, Philip, we were talking during the break that, the Telegraph ran an article saying that that Anthony Blinken warned Ukraine against retaking Crimea, when in reality what he said is, we're not actively pushing them to do anything. If they want to take Crimea, that's on them. We do have concerns what the shift would be back from Russia, which is logical. And that's what strategy and tactical consideration is in every battle. Like, what happens if we do this? What happens if we don't? That, again, giving that land back up also would allow Russia to, reinforce its its navy around that area as well over the next couple of years and try again, maybe eventually take Odessa and then make a path to Moldova. So they're thinking about all these things, and you get a slice of it in the news because they'll ask them one question in an ocean of possibilities. How is it there right now in the people that you're talking to? That we may or may not be hearing that kind of take as far as where things are going, where they aren't going. Because there's so much going on.
Yeah, there is, and there's two things to draw from that Telegraph headline, as opposed to what Blinken said. Because about a week ago, there was a New York Times article where they said they indicated that the United States was telling the Ukrainians where to fire the HIMARS and the MLRS, the multiple launch rocket systems. It's not true. What the Americans do is they say they have satellite imagery, and then they go to the Ukrainians and say, hey, if you look at this, you might see something you might want to shoot at. We're not telling you to shoot at anything.
Right.
We're not even going to tell you what's there. But if you look there, you might see something. And then the Ukrainians go and they look at. And then earlier in the war, there was the argument that the United States was revealing the location of Russian generals. It turned out that wasn't true either. They were passing along information saying, we're not telling you to shoot this general, but we have indication that his staff might be here.
Yeah,
or
giving intelligence support to a country versus
the Americans have gone
ordering
out of
them
their
to do
way.
something is wholly different. Right.
That's right. The Americans have gone out of their way while assisting as far as they can without tipping over, and basically are supporting Ukraine with intelligence and, of course, with weaponry and all that kind of stuff. But they don't want to be seen as active participants in this war because then it does reinforce Putin's idea that this is a war against NATO, and it also would open up NATO to attack. If Russia really wanted to go nuts, they could attack a base in Estonia or something, and then Article 5, and then we're off to the races.
Right.
So the Americans are trying very hard not to become active participants in this. So they can advise about Crimea, but all along they've said we're going to leave that up to the Ukrainians. Now, the Ukrainians, and I myself, my personal opinion is Crimea is a very dangerous thing to go for because the Russians do 100% believe that the referendum was legit back in 2014, and that that Crimea is their land. It's their land.
Right.
It's not true. The referendum was conducted at the end of a bayonet. So I would contest its legitimacy, but I can't dispute that there are an awful lot of Russians who do have homes, that there's an awful lot of ethnic Russians, but then there's a lot of ethnic Ukrainians, and there's a Tatar population, which has historically been abused by the Russians. So there are a lot of people, if another referendum was held in Crimea, free and fair referendum, I don't know where it would come down, but strategically and for Ukraine's future, I can see the position that they've taken, that unless we take Crimea, the Russians will never stop coming for it. And it'll go on and on and on. We need to be back to 91, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, those borders which were agreed upon by all parties throughout the 90s. There were a series of meetings where they're like, these are the borders, right? And everybody said, yes, those are the borders, including Moscow, including Yeltsin's Moscow. It needs to be there. And also, if you look at the map, if the Russians were to control Crimea, they would have several approaches on Ukraine, and they could go along the coastline to Odessa. They could strike across the more easily traversed parts of the Dnieper River.
Right.
I'm scared, frankly, about Crimea. Well, scared's too. It makes me nervous, makes me jittery, because that's a heck of a fight. But I've come around to the way of the Ukrainians thinking that until they control Crimea, they're not the issue will not be resolved. So.
Well, at the recent count,
I think
just so you know, and kind of in reference to that, remember November or like second week of November was around the bridge being hit and that kind of stuff going on, that there was a huge mass exodus of Russians from Crimea. That after a couple of the bombings that got hit, a lot of people turned tail and split. So a lot of the Russians that had been settled there started heading for the hills for fear, and as the news of the reach of the HIMARS increased, as the Ukrainians moved into Kherson and getting closer to it, that became a factor in how long these folks were going to stay in the area. And there's about I guess 500,000 Russians in Ukraine or in Crimea at any given time, and that number has dropped as by half, if not by 3/4, in the last 6 months. So while I do agree that if there was an issue where Ukraine was trying to quote occupy Crimea again against a resurgent interior force of Russians who believed Crimea was theirs, it would be just as ugly as the street-to-street fighting that the Russians, were thinking would be no big deal once they took the rest of the country back at the beginning of this craziness. However, it seems to be that a bunch of these people are pounding sand and beating feet. And ultimately, we may get to a point where the vast majority of the people left behind in Crimea are the Tatars, like you're talking about, ethnic Ukrainians who side with Ukraine, or people who were Russian who side with Ukraine, who are not moving, who are eventually going to wait till the cavalry comes to join the other side or to kick in with them, and just wait till they're out from under the thumb. Because Putin was saying in November that everything, like Crimea's totally safe and fine and all that, and the people just weren't buying it. They were hightailing it out of there.
Yeah, I mean, the Russian population of Crimea is a little bit tricky because a whole chunk of them, a large percentage of them, live most of the year in other parts in Russia proper, in the Russian Federation, primarily in the more wealthy urban centers like St. Petersburg and Moscow, but also Rostov-on-Don or maybe Ekaterinburg. And they have what are called their dachas, basically their summer cottages. Because in a lot of ways, there was a whole period in the Soviet Union, and you could argue even before, where Crimea and the Black Sea were this kind of almost like Florida kind of environment. You might have somewhere, trying to think of an analogy in the United States, but maybe before the Cuban Revolution, how kind of Americans would vacation in Cuba. Anyhow, the Russians have summer homes there. They don't have year-round homes there. Many of them do, a large percentage. There's also a large percentage that are Russian Crimeans. So a lot of the guys who had their summer homes there were like, when the bombs started dropping, they were like, oh, the heck with this, we're out of here. So that happened. I have no doubt that maybe some of them who were legitimate, year-round living on Crimea also may have bugged out. But what concerns me about this population, aside from the fact that, yes, a lot of them have left and, they've lost their summer homes, boo-hoo, I can live with that. What bothers me is the ethnic Russians who do live on the Crimean Peninsula and make it that's their home year round. It's not a good look to be an occupier. If Ukraine has to turn around and forcibly occupy parts of the Crimean Peninsula, that's not good. And I'm uncomfortable with that.
Sure.
But if we can get a third party moderator to maybe hold a proper referendum where neither the Ukrainians or the Russians can put their thumb on the scale by their military presence, maybe we can get a clearer idea of really what the people believe in Crimea. I would posit a guess that they would be more inclined to go towards Ukraine, because it's in many ways a better way of living, and there's a middle class and all sorts of other reasons. But
hope.
We won't know. And if the Ukrainians march in there and then have a referendum with Ukrainian troops on the ground,
Yeah, no.
then
Yeah,
the Russians are going to say it was disputed. I mean, Crimea's a real just
yeah.
can of worms. And
Right.
and
So,
I'm concerned about it. But I've been convinced by Ukrainians. I think I lean towards it needs to return to Kiev's control.
On a yeah, I do think it will be it'll the question becomes, will Ukraine, if Ukraine hits largely the military aspects of Crimea and effectively neutralizes it as a military outpost, which
Yes.
I guess you don't want to destroy your docks or anything, but the idea being is like, we have no intention of this place being a military space for us. It's supposed to be a part of the country. And that's how we're going to do it. And anybody who's on the streets is not soldiers necessarily, but regular police force. And it's simply back to being under Ukraine. And they're like, and Russian nationals who consider this their home, hey, apply for a visa. As long as you didn't fight against us and you want to be a welcomed member of the society, knock yourself out. But if you're here to subvert the government and subvert the people living here, then out you go, which is reasonable. And it's going to be... Yeah. There's no clean way of doing a lot of it because it's been so messy for so long. On our way into the next break, do you know about about this Marina Yankina, this woman who fell out of a window?
She took care of money for the Ministry of Defense, and she slipped and fell out of a 12-story building, like so many other Russian officials have. It's
like Pavel Antov, like
gotta
Ravel
stay away from those slippery surfaces.
And dozens of others. It's interesting to me. Can you imagine if the main accountant for the DOD during the beginning of the Iraq War or the Operation Iraqi Freedom or something suddenly just died under mysterious... Exactly. Was found drowned in her bathtub or hung in her garage or something like that, like the DC Madam. Our government would be turned upside down trying to figure that out. It would be news all over the place. In Russia, it's like the weather, it seems like, with these folks falling out of windows.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Okay,
don't ask any questions.
Yeah. Yes, it's right. Don't ask any questions. Yes, Chimenchis,
It's the original sin.
The less you know, the better off you are. It's the only Russian I know. Chimenchis to Blucha. I know I say it wrong, but who cares? It's not like I'm ever going to use it in conversation. We'll be back right after this with Philip Ettner at Philip Ettner 1L 2 T's on Twitter and Johnny Million, and I'll be back right after this.
I'm happy, you are happy. Let us be happy together. Whether the weather is cloudy or sunny, I will always be your funny honey bunny. I am lucky, you are lucky. Let us get lucky together. Whether the weather is cloudy or breezy, I'll be there to say, hey, come on, let's take it easy. 'Cause isn't it nice to have the friends that you do? And isn't it nice that the sky is so blue? And isn't it nice to say I love you, chugga chugga choo choo, woo woo. I am smiling, you are smiling, let us smile together. Whether the weather is cloudy or stormy, I will still be there in the morning. I'll be right by your side in the morning. I'll make you breakfast in the morning. I hope that you like cereal.
Yay! Hoorah! Yay! As rough as the world is, I want to say that Chud, my cat, who went to the emergency room and was near death, made it through the night and got oxygen and IVs. She's got both of her wrists shaved where they had an IV in both sides. They had to rotate them. She was in an oxygen tent for a little while because she couldn't breathe. Is eating and sleeping normally, and she's a total Garfield, so if she doesn't move at all, that's very normal for her. I think she's cold. She's sitting with her paws under her body because her skin's exposed and she's chilly. And she's definitely aggravated, although she always looks at me like that. She's got python eyes. Some cats have more round eyes than others. Hers are python eyes. She looks like she has the same eyes.
There's RBF for cats.
Yes, James Earl Jones's giant, python that he turns into in Conan. She's got that, and half lidded all the time, like I blame you.
Wow.
But that said, she's adorable and lovely.
But she's going to be okay, we hope.
Yeah, We hope. We will know if
Fingers
there's
crossed.
a chance she has pneumonia, and it'll take a couple of days to show up if she aspirated any of the stuff that she went through, because it was bad. It was really rough.
John Doe just
Yeah.
contributed to Chud's bill.
Oh,
Thank
thanks.
you, John Doe.
Thanks, guys.
We'll hope for the best.
Yes, and by the way, we just hit 48K on YouTube as subscribers. We're getting close to that 50.
Surreal.
Come on, let's hit 50.
There you
Like,
go.
Come on,
subscribe, give a
50.
thumbs up, subscribe, all the kind of stuff. Okay, and help Philip get there too. It doesn't cost you anything to subscribe on YouTube channel, so go throw him some love over there too. Help boost that stuff up. Now, that I will say, with some obviously caveats in there, that Olaf Scholz being reported as saying that he urges Western allies to deliver tanks to Ukraine, and I quote, now. That is a good thing. However foot draggy he was, that's excellent.
I'll take it.
Yep, exactly. We'll take that as good news, and then later, he goes, this means that everyone who can supply such battle tanks should actually do so now. Adding he would be intensely campaigning for allies to move on the issue. And he goes, for me, this is an example of the kind of leadership people can expect from Germany. That's a little hilarious. But ultimately, look, if once you've come over to the right side, we're cool. We're cool. Like, we'll hash this out later. But right now we're in the middle of it. And if you're...
Could have done it 2 months ago, but okay.
Right. It's like the guy in the zombie movie who cries and screams and won't do anything. And then at one point he picks up a hammer and nail and starts at least boarding up the windows so they can't get in. You're like, all right, we'll talk about what a jerk you are later. But right now he's actually doing something. So, okay. Those are my happy ending parts, the count your blessings moments. But the anniversary of the war is coming up. It's this weekend. It's next Saturday.
Next Friday, I believe
Friday,
it is. The
right.
24th.
Yeah.
24th of February. Yep, next Friday.
Right.
And I will say, it's supposed to be a happy ending. And and I'm going to stick with a happy ending, because no matter what they throw at us, we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. So, yes, the anniversary is on Friday. There's a mood in the city here in Kiev, and even when I was out in Lviv, kind of anticipating even further out from the anniversary, they're going to hit us. They're going to hit us, and they're going to hit us hard. It's going to be something. They like to do things on an anniversary.
Right.
So we anticipate there's talk of maybe aircraft being involved coming out of Belarus. I do not think there'll be any kind of land troops coming out of Belarus, but there's definitely going to be a very serious attack on or around the 1 year anniversary, because that's how Russia rolls.
Right.
So we're anticipating that. A lot of people are restocking food supplies. Their water reserves are being conserved, and it's like it was when we were going into the winter campaign of the air attack on the infrastructure. We didn't know how that was going to happen, so people just erred on the side of caution and over prepared. And there's that feeling again in Kiev. I mean, I still have my windows kind of all X'd out with gaffer tape, duct tape, to just in case of an explosion. Where I suspect as we get closer and closer, I will probably sleep with my body armor a little closer to me, and might sleep in some clothing that I can just rush out of the apartment.
Right.
If it gets really bad. But we are anticipating a major attack on the anniversary. Now, when it comes to the bigger picture, when we're talking about Schultz saying, get the tanks in now. Yes, get the tanks in now. But I do not see a way for Russia to seize the capital, which is ultimately what they'll need to do if they want to propose some sort of victory. They will not be able to do it before the tanks are here.
Right.
I believe that strongly. The cities are fortresses. and they will make the Russians pay for every mile, and they won't be able to take Kiev before those game-changing main battle tanks and the Bradley fighting vehicles are going to be online here.
Right.
Still, how many, every moment you delay is another moment where the Russians are slaughtering people.
Right.
So, get the tanks here as quickly as possible. And I think they're in the midst of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Bradley fighting vehicles are going to be a game changer as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Ukrainians will be able to combine all of these different elements of an offensive and do what's called combined armor doctrine, something the Russians do not do. The Russians use artillery and then they throw bodies at the thing.
Right.
The Ukrainians are transitioning to a more NATO style of military doctrine, which is you have drones, you have artillery, you have infantry and infantry fighting vehicles that then can engage the enemy when the infantry is dismounted, and then of course you have main battle tanks. So, I think that there will be a war of maneuver now that the winter is ending, and once the Russian offensive is spent,
Yep.
and the Ukrainian counteroffensive starts, it's going to be a lot more maneuver, and I anticipate that they will be sweeping, armored kind of columns and maneuver to cut off entire Russian battle groups. This next war is going to be a different war than what we saw previously when the Ukrainians were kind of on their back foot, defending themselves admirably,
Mm-hmm.
but they were on their back foot. So let's get those tanks here as quickly as possible.
Agreed.
Ultimately, Ukraine will win.
There was a question.
But it's just
there
a
was a
question of
question.
how.
Yeah, there was a question also, and we got only a few minutes left, so I wanted to address this one. Somebody had brought up in there, and no, it's good because it kind of ties into what we're talking about, so it fluidly works. There was a report coming out that Putin is intending on, this according to the Institute for the Study of War, and other sites are also affirming this, but that Lukashenko confirmed that Belarus has implemented a system wherein Russia can usurp control of their military factories to produce weapons, artillery, tanks, and other stuff for the Russian military, which I think, quite frankly, they think is their way of stiff arming and helping Russia without actually getting involved. But I think it's going to get them more involved than they think, because if their bullets are made there.
Well, maybe. I mean, their argument is if you can bring in allies to supply with weapons, then we can bring in allies to supply with weapons, and it's their anemic response to the international response to their invasion.
Sure.
I can't see the Belarusian forces actively getting involved in Ukrainian territory because. Again, Lukashenko is in a very precarious position. If he moves his troops, which he uses to suppress his own people, who are increasingly upset with his leadership and have been for the last 20, 30 years, increasingly in the last, 10 years. I mean, there have been massive protests that are only put down by violence. If he uses those forces, which he needs to suppress his own people, and sends them here, well, then his own people are going to rise up against him. It's my firm conviction. So, I'm not scared about Belarus. The only thing that concerns me about Belarus is that Belarus is going to let the Russians use their territory as a staging area, as I said, maybe for airplanes, but also maybe for armor. And if their industrial power, as meager as it is applied to resupply Russian, that's the only way I see Belarus being a major factor in this. I'm not being 100% dismissive, but I don't see Belarusian troops on Ukrainian soil.
Right.
I mean,
Agreed.
there's even the possibility of defections within the Belarusian army if that's what happens. So,
okay.
we
First
shall
of all,
see,
in the
but I'm
last,
not overly concerned.
Yeah, in the last couple of minutes, I just want to convey that the chat has been, as we've been talking about lots of different things, and there's been plenty of stories to discuss today. They've just been expressing their appreciation and concern for you and want you to be safe
Definitely.
as this week approaches. and I don't doubt it. I'm curious, and we will speak on Wednesday as well. Hopefully, if you're able to join me on my regular on the morning live stream. And I very possibly this week I might have Malcolm Nance on one of the other days, and we'll talk back and forth about his experience with you as well. So he'll tell me stories about what you really do when you're out buying pickles and drinking stuff. And but the most important thing is that you stay safe, and we appreciate you bringing context to this war as it goes on, because it's about genuine human needs for life and liberty and safety and security, and is a very strong contrast. It's something that we haven't had in a long time for people to look at and go, yeah, there's distinctly someone awful trying to do something distinctly awful to another group of people, and it's abundantly clear. And there are people who will mess with that.
And for that reason, and many more, I'm not going anywhere. So thank you for your concern, but I made my decision. I'm a grown ass man. I can make my decision, and I'm not going anywhere.
Thanks so much, Philip. Thank you, Johnny Million. Thank you, Chicago. We'll see you next week. Take care of yourself and take care of somebody else. And remember, people, if you're ever confronted with a choice that you think is the lesser of two evils, choose less evil. See you next week.